people, the general public, wake up to the fact that inflation is a deliberate policy. And what do I mean by that? Well, people realize that the government and the central bank, they're the ones to blame for inflation.
Hi everyone, this is Arpad from the YouTube channel Starpath Academy, and today my co-host is Mario from the YouTube channel Maneko64. Mario, thank you for being here.
You're welcome, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Your channel is just one of the topmost channels for me to check out whenever something comes out regarding gold or rules change or the economy is on shift. So I wanted to ask you about your opinion for the future of the price of gold about the Shanghai Gold Exchange, because you had some really good thoughts on your channel that I recommend for everyone to check out.
Yeah, I mean, the price of gold and silver have been rising quite sharply of late, especially gold. We made new all-time highs at above $2,400, and silver as well, even though, excuse me, even though we're not close to the $50 mark that we hit in 2011 and 1980, we've broken through 30. So that's really encouraging. And before we look at Shanghai, I just wanted to say that uh, unfortunately, what the rising price of gold and silver is telling me is that the dollar and all other fiat currencies are going to continue to lose value versus, the everything that we need to survive. But as to do with Shanghai, um, the London Bullion Market Association, or the LBMA, and New York, they've controlled the pricing of gold, well, at least London, for hundreds of years. And COMEX, of course, came on board in the mid 70s when America made gold legal again. And one of the reasons they created that futures exchange was to make Americans trade gold on paper,
Mm,
and to make the market volatile, so Americans wouldn't rush to buy real gold, because the bullion banks, central banks, don't want you holding gold. And why is that? Well, because gold over time is the best really store of value, and it doesn't like the value like fiat currencies, and they want you in the fiat currencies because if you're not there, they can't keep the system going, because the system based on credit, and they need you to play the game. So Shanghai and even Russia to some extent, they know how the bullion banks in London and New York work, how they operate for the central banks, how they use the futures market to make the market volatile and scare people off. If you ask anybody, or the average person in the street, or someone that asks you, what should I invest in? And you say gold. I've had many people say to me, oh, no, gold is very volatile. I won't go into gold. So I think the reason for the banks being involved in the gold market and using a lot of paper, because that's what the futures is. They never deliver the gold. They just bet on the price, is to discourage people from being gold. And China, on the other hand, they know that gold is very important for the system. So the Chinese government, the central bank, they don't buy the futures. They want the real thing, the physical. And funnily enough, even though it's supposedly a communist country, they've been encouraging the public in China to buy physical gold. And I think even if they hadn't encouraged them, the Chinese have kind of they're into gold. They're very
yeah.
capitalistic, the Chinese people, and they save a lot because there's no welfare state, and their stock market and the real estate market hasn't done too well of late. So they've gravitated to gold. And the problem for the West and the price controllers of gold in the West is that they didn't expect this. They didn't expect a huge physical demand like this, and that's why gold is going up. And I think it's still early days. And generally speaking, the people in the West have no clue of what's going on, but they will wake up one day, not just the general public, also investors in general, and they'll realize they need a little bit of physical gold. So that's how I see it. And what's happening is that demand in China is so huge that there's a premium. You have to pay more in China to buy gold, even when you do the foreign exchange transaction. So a lot of the physical gold is flowing from west to east, and the price from London and New York is having to catch up with the Chinese price, or else they're gonna lose a lot of gold.
Definitely. And sort of the Eastern people have this cultural understanding and then this historical view of things and economies, because even though they're communist, they have these like plans, right? The 5-year, 10-year, 50-year plan. So everything is kind of planned out and they have a bigger understanding of things. Whereas kind of here in the West, we tend to have shorter attention spans, maybe 5 years, 20 years at max, but definitely lose a lot of historical knowledge that would have been passed down. Maybe because of technology, maybe breaking the family unit up or getting your children out from as out of the house as soon as possible, whereas they kind of tend to have or used to have larger families working and living together. That was definitely the case in Eastern Europe back in when I lived there, but things are changing. So that's great points. Could you please explain to the viewers what is the action of naked shorting, or how can the banks use the bullion banks to drive the price of gold or silver down through the futures market? Just a little bit more detail, because I bet a lot of people don't know, and I know you're an expert in this.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say about why the Chinese and other countries are into gold is that they've had a very turbulent last
Right.
century
Right.
currency. We in the West it's been pretty stable. But anyway, the manipulation, or the paper game as we call it, is in the futures is that for example, you can buy, let's say, a gold contract. Usually it's 100 ounces equivalent, and you only have to deliver it, let's say, in 2 months or 3 months. And you only have to put like 5 to 10% down to buy that 100 ounces. So what you do, you go in the futures market, you buy these contracts, you can drive the price up as well as down, but you buy the gold contracts with little money, and if it goes up, you just get out. So there's never really an exchange of physical gold. And what the bullion banks do, for example, if gold is rising and is testing, let's say, like it did in the last few years, tested the 2000 level, they could always come in and do the opposite. They'll just sell thousands of contracts of gold that they don't have. And it triggers a lot of sales because they hit the key levels, and it triggers stop losses. And then they cover it, but then they've changed the sentiment, so everyone else starts selling, and they keep doing this back and forth. But now it's getting more and more difficult because there's this big demand in China for the real gold, so it's harder for them to stay naked short, because they could suddenly find themselves uh, the someone asking for delivery, they don't have the gold, and they could lose their shirt or even default on those shorts. And that's how it works. It's basically like betting,
Hmm.
just betting on the price without really trading the physical gold and silver. And this is something that happens also in the foreign exchange market. There's a lot of leverage and gambling and betting in the foreign exchange market. And if you go back 80 or even 50, 60 years, gold and silver are traded as currencies in the foreign exchange market. And I think that's how they get it. And in London, they do the same, but it's traded mainly foreign exchange. And in New York, they've got the futures, which is very similar to like a foreign exchange market. And yeah, that's how it works. So they scare the public because people see gold approaching 2000 and they say, oh, is it going to hold? And then all of a sudden, the banks come and smash it down. Yeah. And then people get discouraged and they say, oh, I forget about gold. That's why you have to be so patient because now it broke out of this. It was just above 2000. It was the
Mhm.
high in the last 4 years. It's broken out of it. And you can see now that they've kind of lost control. And I think I'm not sure they're going to gain control of what's called the paper market. And I think the people who really want physical gold could be in charge. And we've seen also not just China, but other central banks around the world. They have been buying a lot of gold since 2022. And central banks, they don't buy futures, they buy the real thing.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks for explaining that. So basically looking at key prices and trend lines and breaking them, right, is well, yeah, it's hard to kind of get into gold if you see like a multi-day red line downwards, right? And you just know the sentiment changes from there on in. You mentioned something really good that I was about to ask. What is the reason, do you think, why a lot of central banks are buying gold? Like, if the financial system is so great and the economy is so great, right? We're making new highs, and the recession that never came, right? Because we suddenly calculate recessions differently than we used to. Why do you think? What is the reason for central banks to purchase gold, right? Because it's an ancient relic, they tell us, right? It's they come up with pet rock or whatever they come up with. Yet somehow the big guys are in the shadows collecting as much as they can. Even countries, small countries like Hungary or Germany repatriating gold, or other countries repatriating gold, and suddenly they're accumulating it. But why do you think they want gold if everything is hunky dory and going the direction uh, that they tell us that it is?
Yeah, the German case, I think there was a bit of an awakening because the German people themselves, they own a lot of gold. I think they own like 5% of the world's gold, maybe even more, because they've known from their grandparents, parents about hyperinflation. And so there was back in almost about 10 years ago, there's a movement that people wanted Germany to repatriate, the Bundesbank, its gold back to Germany, and they did. And it took quite a while to do it. New York Fed didn't want to do that. And Hungary and even Poland, they've been buying a lot of gold. And I think Hungary and Poland is more to do with the fact that they didn't have that much and they wanted to make sure they wanted to replenish their reserves. But I think in the last 2 years, we've seen the central banks of what's called like the global south and Russia and China. The reason they've been buying hand over fist is because of what happened with the Russian foreign reserves after the events, in 2022, the war with Ukraine and all the talk, all the sanctions, the freezing of the reserves. Now they're talking, the West is talking about actually stealing those reserves. And the West is also talking tough towards China about Taiwan. And countries are saying, wow, if they can take Russia's gold, if they can, or Russia's reserves, if they can take maybe China's reserves, and not just countries, but they've frozen a lot of reserves of very wealthy people that had their money, let's say in Switzerland and other places, Russians. So what's the other alternative to holding dollar reserves and other, euro reserves? Well, it's physical gold because physical gold, you can hold it yourself. You don't have to leave it in a bank. The Americans or the Europeans won't be able to freeze your account because you are the central bank. The central banks historically they should hold the gold. For
Right.
some reason, the tradition had been to hold their gold at the New York Fed or at the Bank of England in London. So they're learning now that's a dangerous thing. And I also think the fact that America and Japan and Europe and the UK, they've been printing so much money and creating so much debt that they know the fiat currency system is very fragile and gold is a hedge. So there's a few reasons, I would say, why they're continuing to buy. But though the major Western central banks, though they're not buying any gold that I know of, they might be doing it on the slide, but I don't think so.
Interesting. It turns out everything is just a promise or a promissory note or a promise on a promise. So I guess we can talk about the importance of self-custody here, because if all you get is even the paper, right, or the fiat is, it's really just a number on a digital screen, right? It's just someone telling you that they will allow you to spend this amount for this amount. It's really just contracts, if you will, that okay, you have X amounts of dollars here and I have X amounts of dollars there, but there's not the printed dollars out. It's just kind of an accounting system that the world monetary system became. And I think that's you're correct in, or I agree with you at least that it's gonna crash. The whole monetary world system is probably on the brink of crash, especially after 2008. It definitely felt like that. And we have bought some time, but eventually everyone's just gonna be with what they own physically, right? But before that, I wanted to, so you had some really great videos about the cashless society and talk about the importance of cash. While it is fiat, it is at least somewhat more real than just numbers on a screen. And you had some really great point. Could you share some points with the viewers about the importance of using cash, even though it's not something that you want to hold maybe for the long term, right? Or it's not something that you want to hold the majority of your wealth in, the importance of it is quite stark.
Yeah, I think it's more to do with freedom and human
Right.
lib. Even though it's a fiat currency and a paper note that has nothing behind it, at least it's private. So you could go and transact with that banknote or dollar bill or coins, and no one knows who you are. And the counter argument is that, oh, you shouldn't worry because if you don't have anything to hide. But I think privacy is a really important part of Western values. And I think if you go cashless, you don't give people options. It's like they're treating everyone as a criminal. That's
Right.
their excuse. They want to control money laundering and arms deals and like all kinds of illicit activities. But I would say 95 or more percent of the people, they're not criminals. And I think, like you said, even though fiat currency is not the best store of value, I think we should be allowed to use cash. But even if the governments don't pass laws banning it, I think a lot of the banks
Right.
they're going for that as well because they get paid as well. Every time you transact with a debit card or with your Apple Pay, the banks get a cut. So that's the other thing as well. But with fiat currency and coins, the people who get the cut is the state. They get the seigniorage, which is the cost of just issuing those notes. But here with a cashless society, yeah, the banks will be in charge of you. You won't have anything real, no self-custody, as you said earlier. And that's why I think it's so bad. And hopefully more and more people will become aware of this because they use the convenience card, right? Because it's
Right.
very convenient to just use. But people need to realize there's nothing behind those payments. It's not real.
Exactly. It's always through comfort and convenience that they slowly pick away your rights. And at some point you just give up because so much has already been taken away. It's quite interesting. I try to use cash as much as possible, at least for even like groceries. And they are making it somewhat difficult for sure because some, self-checkouts don't take it, or this is not working, or they even the self-checkout, like they try to limit the numbers. So if I have time, I try to make it uncomfortable for them, and then just I'll wait in line if I have time and play chess on my phone, and to make sure that I try to use as much as possible, because I think rights are sort of like muscles. Either we use them or we lose them. And I think more people need to wake up to using cash because, as you said, like if I take $100 and transact with it, right, through a bank or through a card, digital dollars, then what 3.5% is usually taken, right? Or sometimes even more. And then it's no longer $100, right? It's less than that. It's 90 something, 965. And that and two more times and it's even less, right? How many times do you have to reuse it? And it really money travels fast, among the small people, because if I just pay for something for a service and then you take the same amount of money and go and have your car washed, and then the car washer needs to pay for the chemicals and the bill, electric bill, and so on and so forth, it travels fast in these circles and it doesn't take too many turns and it's gone basically. They're robbing you blind without you knowing it. Not necessarily you, but the service provider, right? So
Yeah,
whoever's taking your cash, he's
uh,
getting charged. So you don't complain about it. But honestly, I think they actually just calculated back into the price. So if the price was maybe, $20, now they have to charge 25 because they know they're gonna lose some if you're paying with card. So actually, unknowingly, your prices are being kept up because the banks need to take their cut. And it's so unnecessary, right?
yeah,
It's
and the
quite
banks as
interesting.
well, and also like the service providers, they'll have to lease a card machine or
Oh
something,
yeah, absolutely.
and they have to pay a fee every month as well, just for they can't buy the card machine and not because I started a business in 2012 and I wanted to just buy the card machine, but no, you have to pay like $50 every month to the bank just to use that machine.
Right. It's quite interesting. It's really becoming a control system, not really money at some point. It's just like a credit score that you get and they push it around. It's so disconnected from reality and the physical world that it's becoming scary. So I think we have to push back. And as if you're a service provider, what you can do is just like ask them for an extra charge. Like, okay, $20 is the price, but oh, if you're paying card, then it's $20 plus 3.5%. Or somehow we have to incentivize people to use cash again, because that's probably the only way how, the average people who's not into gold and not into bartering or silver or maybe even crypto, they're just want to live a normal life, but they have to be participating in making sure that we keep our freedoms, because um, it's usually the convenience is the route that they get you through. So we have to make it inconvenient, or uncomfortable to use the services that we don't want to. I guess we don't
Yeah,
want to come into our lives. Yeah,
unfortunately, the people who don't know about barter, gold and silver, I don't think they care much about they just want the convenience. But hopefully they'll wake up. And I think that having old constitutional silver or the old silver coins here in the UK, that's a good thing because I had someone come and help us in the garden a couple of weeks ago. Usually I do it with my wife, but I have to recover from my surgery, so I was told to rest. So I hired this guy, and I paid him cash, but I also gave him like an old silver coin from the UK, and he really liked it. And I said, "Well, it's worth about 10, 15 pounds maybe." And he said, "Oh, that's really nice." So I try to do that sometimes when I have people doing stuff for me.
that's
Uh,
great.
Independent people, give them a bit of silver and tell them about it. I think that's the only way forward, really. And I see that Alabama, for example, and other
Yeah.
in the US. They're moving towards making gold and silver legal tender again and scrapping the tax. So, despite the fact it's discouraging to see all this cashless move, it's encouraging also to see that I think it's about 13 US states are moving towards sound money, maybe, hopefully.
It's definitely the first step. So we were very happy here at Alabama to hear that. It's definitely the first step because in order to for us to be able to transact in precious metals, we need to make sure that the money itself is not taxed just because it changed hands, right? So I think that's or just because it fluctuates in value, and by the time you got it and by the time you spend it, there's like a different value attached to it in fiat dollars, right? So quite interesting. I think there are definitely silver linings here and there, and people are waking up. But I completely agree with you. Like it's up to us who are in the know to help others realize the importance of owning some precious metals, right? And another great video where you talked about the crackup boom, and that's something that I somewhat experienced through when we went through hyperinflation in Romania. But you have such a good historical aspect of it, and you have some really good book recommendations that I also recommend. Could you talk about the crackup boom and what you read and just kind of the historical knowledge of what's the definition of the crackup boom as an Austrian economist would say.
Yeah, and it was Ludwig von Mises, one of the fathers of Austrian economics, who used the term crack up boom. And basically, it's when people, the general public, wake up to the fact that inflation is a deliberate policy. And what do I mean by that? Well, people realize that the government and the central bank, they're the ones to blame for inflation. It's not the greedy businessman or businesswoman. It's not because of the war, because of Putin. I've heard that a lot. It's because they just create too much currency and credit out of thin air, and it dilutes the value of the currency. And it takes a while for people to realize that, mainly because they're brainwashed by the mainstream economic press, the mainstream press, by politicians. They never want to admit that they create the inflation. So they blame different people and they say it's almost like they make inflation be like a natural disaster. But when people learn that it's not, then there's a rush when you get the currency, when you're paid for your job or whatever, uh, there's a rush to get rid of that and buy goods that are real, goods that have value. So what that looks like is the currency losing value and everything that's real or tangible, like gold, silver, and even stocks for of
Yeah.
companies that are involved in real things go up. And I think and food goes up as well a lot, and we're seeing that. So the crack up boom means that it's just that the currency, there's so little demand for it, and by that I mean you get the currency, you don't save it, you just want to get rid of it to get real things, and then yeah, that's when people realize that there's something wrong with it. And von Mises said, and we can look at the examples in the 1920s Germany when people realized that things just it happens really quickly. It's almost like if you haven't gotten rid of that currency, it's gonna lose all its value because people are just just gonna rush to real things. So that's why it's called the crack up boom. And you look at the stock market, the Nasdaq, the Dow at 40,000, gold, silver, copper. I think we could be in the beginnings of the crack up boom. And the worst thing you can do is to hold a lot of currency in this situation. And that it's basically the same term as a hyperinflation or a currency collapse.
Right, definitely. So from the outside, it looks like everything is going well because look at the stock price of this company. And that was the case in Romania as well. For instance, the company, the factory that my mother worked for, and her, I guess, pension was related to the stock price of the factory, and everything was going fine. And suddenly the stock was, we weren't be able to kind of freely trade as in an app or something like that, but there were still shares and calculated and kind of calculated the price of factories and what you will get as a pension. And everything started going up because I guess the crackup boom was happening. And from the outside, you could say, well, this factory is doing amazing. Look, the share prices have quadrupled, or, the price went up 10 times. But if you take a look at the raw material, that went up 20 times or 50 times its original value. And of course, the factory went bust. And eventually, the price was paid out, or the large amounts in numbers was paid out for my mom. But then she took the whole thing out, and who didn't even take it out? They lost everything. She took it out in time, but the time they gave it out, the whole pension was good enough for, I think, a purse she purchased with. So from the outside, numbers go up, yay, but the actual world, in physical things that you would need to buy, that doesn't make sense. You just realize it's a number on a screen. So people who would have bought, like in Weimar, Germany, there's examples, right, where people went in and bought up the whole store, just bicycles, all his money into bicycles, and then it would at least have a lot of bicycles. And after the currency crashed, he was able to sell back the bicycles. And that's something very similar what my father did. He tried to collect aluminum and copper. Now, ideally, because he was machining it, but because he was a machinist, but he ended up purchasing more and more, because at least it kept its value. Before and after, it was still a piece of copper or still a piece of aluminum instead of worthless currency. It's crazy how things happen, and people forget it so fast. It's amazing that they just think, well, now it's surely it won't happen again, which is absolutely
Yeah,
mind-boggling.
you said that the share price of the company your mom worked for
Yeah,
kept going up, but the problem is when the currency starts falling faster than the
exactly.
share price is going up, then it's finished.
You're actually you losing value. And not just that, the factory goes bust because they can't readjust everything so fast, right? So the raw materials go up faster than how they can adjust the prices, right? Or they can adjust the factory wages, right? So at some point, the whole thing just got shut down, and it was sold for pennies on the dollar to German investors who really just bought the real estate, and the machines got stolen. Everything was eventually the name of the company was kept, but and it's still operating, but it was a different thing, and everybody got laid off and then rehired at some point in different prices. And it was just kind of sad to see that people who had all this, well, time invested and money invested in their life, and kind of like planned out, well, this is how I will retire, and this is how I will live, and everything was taken away within a couple of years, basically from 89 to 94. The majority of it was gone. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
uh, the fiat currency, when it gets destroyed, it destroys also the price signals, and
Yeah.
without price signals, it's difficult to produce anything. And yeah, that's why it's so disruptive. And unfortunately, very few people, when it's happening, they don't know what's going on. It's like now we would know because you've grown up and you've learned about it. But I'm sure that people in Romania at the time, they were probably thinking, what's going on, because they don't teach these things in school, crack up boom, and
Yeah.
that's a subject they don't want to talk about. But sound money, though, that's the only way to keep the price signal stable, and they've been able to keep it fairly stable since Nixon closed the gold window. But I think now we're going into a period where it's getting really, yeah, it's going to be very treacherous and dangerous for people who, not just people who hold a lot of currency, but people like that depend on that currency, like your mom did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely so. It's so I was even talking with about this with my mother-in-law, who was telling me a story about her father and her grandfather about the previous. These things happen, so it's not like once. Some people live through it multiple times in their lifetime, just like how my grandmother lived through, I believe, two or three. Or the Pengu, the Hungarian Pengu, the first Romanian hyperinflation or high inflation when communism came to Romania, and then the second one, which was in 89. And these things happen, yet people still forget it, and somehow, as you said, they never teach this, and people still think that they have this, faith that things will go the way they have gone in the last 10 years or 20 years. One of the story that she was telling me how his grandfather, who worked with leather and made leather boots and everything like that, eventually all he was left with the products and the raw material. He could no longer sell it because the demand kind of shifted from high-end boots to whatever people can eat, and he needed to trade very high-end leather made boots for loaves of bread, and that's how they had to survive. So it was the pricing structure and the mechanism completely is messed up, and everybody just goes back to survival mode. And she did share this with the memory where people went into stores and they just like, give me that whole shelf, whatever you have. And even at that point, like even the seller realizes it's not worth it for me to sell it because what am I getting is just paper, and I have to also sell it. So it's things really go fast, and then there are lines in front of stores, and it's people are scrambling. Hopefully we don't get there, but and yeah, one more thing that I wanted to talk about was CBDCs, basically central bank digital currencies. I have like a few maybe theories that maybe they want to introduce CBDCs because they see the writing on the wall and it's coming to an end. And maybe that's their theory. If we have CBDCs, we can use that to stop the hyperinflation. But also, another theory of mine is that maybe they want to use hyperinflation to push everyone into CBDCs. So, and maybe there are other theories out there, but what is your opinion about CBDCs and kind of what's to come regarding that?
Yeah, CBDC is the central bank cashless world. I mean, if I had a bank, if I was a bank, I would be concerned about it because why would you need a bank if people just get their currency, their digital currency from the central bank? So that's how I see it. And it's not just that they want to make it digital, but they want to keep track of you. And I think that it's easier to tax people as well because there's no cash. And in terms of whether it will come through, I'm not too sure. And the 2 points you made are interesting, that they might use CBDCs to trigger the hyperinflation, or they might use the CBDC as a solution to the hyperinflation. I think the latter is more likely because they can say, look, yeah, our currency collapsed. It
Right.
was Xi Jinping and Putin's fault
Of
because
course.
they did this. So
Personally, yeah.
yeah, so we're gonna have to bring a CBDC and we're gonna replenish all your accounts and also all the old debt that the governments had, that's wiped out because that's what happens in hyperinflation. All the debts are wiped out, but your debts though will probably be still there, I would say. Maybe not. Who knows? That would be nice. So yeah, that would be an excuse to bring the CBDC. Hopefully, people will wake up and realize how can we trust the people that ran the old system to the ground to bring in a better system. That will be the key here, whether enough people wake up to realize that it wasn't Putin's or Xi Jinping or Iran's fault that we had hyperinflation. That's still to see. My hope is that CBDCs fail and people don't buy into it.
Definitely. I think that's our hope, and I think we're like just by letting people know what's in the stew basically is hopefully enough for people to realize that this is really a control system that they want to push. And I think there are enough freedom loving people out there in the world if they realize and if they're in the know that we can fight back just by passively resisting and not using things, because in the end we produce the stuff and we consume the stuff, and they're just a managerial class that's kind of sitting there pushing numbers on papers or on digital screens. So hopefully that will be enough. But yeah, another thing that you reminded me of, that another story of back, this was not from 1989, but when Gheorghiu Dej came on, the first Romanian dictator in communism, then they had also a currency change, because as soon as the communists came to Romania, they hyperinflated, they just started printing. Then in that case, I believe the debt was wiped away. However, everything else was taken property as well from you. So it's not like you you were like a happy camper just because your debt went away. However, the old currency, eventually, I think the financial minister of the king, Romanian king, prior that was jailed. And once they figured out, well, they can't do this money stuff, they need to release that person from jail and let him figure out what to do with the money, because it's like the country was collapsing. And then they released him, and then they came up with the idea of the new Romanian lei currency, and they somehow calculated an arbitrary number that I think 100 of the old currency is going to be traded into 2.5 or 2.4 new currency, but you're only allowed per person, per family, you're only allowed to trade in, I think, up to 200 of the old currency. And the rest of the old currency you can't use. That became just pieces of paper. So they can get creative. And I have talked with people with Lebanon, in Lebanon, how they came up with a creative idea there. It was again creative in 89. So we have no idea what's to come. But I think we can resist peacefully. And I think let's maybe end on a note where, how do you see your viewers? Just you reaching 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. Congratulations. That means like more and more people are paying attention to people like you who share really valuable and true information about what's to come and how we can avoid this situation. I do feel that, there's definitely people waking up. What is your opinion about that? And maybe how can we steer history into a different direction?
Yeah, I think more and more people are waking up. I I've known about the hyperinflation and the currency and fiat currency for like 20 years. And back then, if you said fiat currency to someone, they would think you're crazy. Nowadays, a lot of people do know. And I made a video. I interviewed someone I met through LinkedIn back in November of 2022, Clive Thompson. You might have heard of him. In the first interview I did with him, we touched upon CBDC, and I was really surprised that that interview went so viral. We have almost 600,000 views. So yeah, you just have to keep plugging away. You have to be careful with the censorship as well.
Yeah.
You can't make it personal. I think you need to explain this how the system works and how it's bad for you, for liberty and freedom, and not like point fingers at people and like swear at them or call them names, because then they'll cut you off. You have to be a little more diplomatic and try to get the message across. But I think it's encouraging because you get the network effect,
Yeah.
and you just have to keep plugging away. That's the only way I see it.
Great. Well, I encourage everyone to check out your channel, Maneko64. I will have links below. So also, if you haven't, please subscribe to this channel and his channel as well. Mario, it's been a great pleasure to have you here. Always bringing great information. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Um,
So do you think we're close, like in the States and in Europe, to some kind of currency event, or they might, bring out a crisis card, and basically put the economy on a war footing. I think that could be the way out for them. You know,
I'm don't know what's I definitely feel that something's gonna happen. I feel something, not maybe the currency crisis, but I have a feeling that something will happen. I think the BRICS are meeting in October, if I'm correct. And probably that time there will be some announcement.